My mom told me I'd ruin everything if I showed up. She called me a disgrace and made sure I knew I wasn't welcome at my own brother's graduation. But what no one knew is that I was the one who helped him get there in the first place. I'm Avery, and this is the story of how I was erased from my family's celebration until the truth slipped into the spotlight, right when no one expected it. Have you ever been shut out by your own family, only to find your strength in silence? Tell me below, because sometimes the ones they silence are the ones who deserve to be heard the most. I always knew my absence wouldn't be announced. It would be carefully edited out, like a photo cropped just enough to make it seem like I was never there to begin with. That's exactly what happened. My old graduation picture, once framed next to Daniel's kindergarten award, vanished sometime last year. I only noticed because Grandma sent me a blurry phone pic, captioned with her usual cryptic warmth. "Still proud of you, no matter where they place the frames." The hallway wall in my childhood home, once cluttered with school certificates, art projects, and posed family photos, had quietly realigned itself around a narrative that no longer included me. I leaned back on my couch, letting the silence of my apartment settle around me like a familiar blanket. The place was small, a studio carved out of the second floor of a creaky old house in northeast Portland. The rent wasn't cheap, but it was mine. The walls were bare except for a corkboard of sticky notes and an old Polaroid of Daniel and me on Halloween, him in a dragon costume, me in oversized butterfly wings, both covered in face paint and candy stains. My phone buzzed. Grandma Louise FaceTime? I hesitated. Her calls usually meant she had something too delicate to put in a text. I answered. "Hi, Grandma." Her face filled the screen. Cheeks rosy, gray hair pulled into her signature low bun. She wore one of those floral robes that only women over 70 can wear without irony. "Oh, honey," she sighed. "Are you going to Daniel's graduation next Saturday?" The question landed like a feather and a stone at once, gentle in tone, heavy in meaning. I tilted my head. "I haven't exactly been invited." Her lips thinned. "That doesn't mean you aren't welcome." "I think it kind of does." Grandma looked down at something, probably her tea. "He's been asking about you." I blinked. "Daniel?" He didn't say much, just, "You might want to be there." I didn't respond right away. It wasn't the first time Grandma tried to coax me into family events, birthdays, Easters, even a family barbecue I didn't know existed until it appeared on Facebook with 30 tagged photos and not a single mention of me. After we hung up, I opened my laptop. Out of habit, I checked my inbox. Nothing. No Evite. No forwarded university notice. No, "Hey Avery, just so you know," from Mom. Just another chain email from an old boss and a newsletter I kept forgetting to unsubscribe from. I closed the laptop and stood, pacing toward my small bookshelf. Tucked between two cookbooks was a manila folder labeled "Letters That Never Got Sent." I pulled it out and opened the flap. Inside were a few cards, drafts of apologies, scraps of poems. But at the bottom was what I was really looking for, a screenshot printed out on plain paper. Daniel's message. "Thanks for helping with that essay. Couldn't have done this without you." It was dated 4 years ago, the night before the final deadline for the National Scholars Program. He was stuck. The prompt was complex, and Daniel, brilliant though he was, had a hard time expressing emotion. I had offered to review his draft. I ended up rewriting the entire second half. He won the scholarship. Mom had cried when the letter came. She hugged Daniel so tightly I thought he might pass out. She called relatives, posted on Facebook, and even sent cookies to the admissions office. She never asked how he pulled it off, but I knew. Daniel knew. And then, as always, it was never spoken of again. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a notification. I opened Instagram. Susan Collins had posted a professional photo of Daniel in his cap and gown, taken early on campus, hands neatly clasped. The caption read, "So proud of my only successful child. The future is bright and so is he. Sir Class of 2023." Proud mom. There it was, the word only. I stared at the photo longer than I should have, trying to decide whether it hurt more than usual or if I had simply grown used to the ache. I remembered the last real conversation I had with her. I had been accepted into a visual storytelling fellowship in Seattle. It was competitive. The program focused on ethical journalism and creative media, things I loved, things I was good at. But Mom didn't see it that way. "I told people you were applying to med school," she said, her voice like a blade wrapped in silk. I had laughed, thinking she was joking. "Why would you do that?" "Because that's the path people respect," she said, "not this hobby." This hobby got me into one of the top 5 creative fellowships on the West Coast. It's not respectable. It's real, and it's mine. She'd shaken her head, a rare emotion flashing across her face. Not anger, not disappointment, fear. Like I had just pulled the rug from under a very fragile structure she had spent years building. She looked at me like I'd grown another head. "You're throwing your life away." I shrugged. "I'd rather live mine than fake yours." She didn't say another word, but she never hugged me goodbye. That was 5 years ago. Since then, the silence between us had grown roots. I was still staring at Daniel's photo when another message appeared. "Susan Collins, please don't come to the graduation. This is his day. Don't embarrass us." It was plain, cold, surgical. Not me. United States. The we I'd been cut from years ago now had an official border. There would be no misunderstandings, no accidental kindness. She wanted distance, and she wanted it in writing. I locked my phone and tossed it onto the couch. I paced for a few seconds, then walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, took a sip. My hand shook slightly as I set it down. I hadn't planned to go. I really hadn't. Until now. I wasn't on the guest list, but I knew this campus better than most people in that crowd. The University of Oregon's lawns were greener than I remembered. The shade from the elms thicker, their roots more jagged beneath the sidewalks. I walked the same pathways I used to take between classes, once hurrying, earbuds in, a coffee in one hand and an overdue assignment in the other. Back then, I moved through this place like I belonged. Now, I was a ghost, a shadow moving alongside ceremony goers in floral dresses and navy suits. I didn't need a ticket, not officially. My old student press credentials had gotten me access to enough university events in the past, and with a little charm and the right badge, still laminated and tucked in my shoulder bag, I slid through the alumni gate without question. It was mid-June, a good kind of sunny, the kind that didn't make you sweat, but warmed your shoulders just enough to feel noticed. Families gathered in clusters across the grass, clutching camera phones and iced lemonades. Folding chairs creaked beneath excited parents. Streamers and gold, 2023 balloons danced against the breeze. I lingered near the tech booth, half hidden behind a row of vendor tents, selling school merch and overpriced popcorn. No one noticed me. And that was the point. I wasn't there for Susan. I wasn't even there for Daniel. I came for the part of me that still wanted to witness the moment, even from a distance. My phone buzzed. Grandma Louise. "Honey, are you there?" I answered in a whisper. "I'm here, standing back near the AV tent." "I knew you'd come." Her voice sounded like warm tea. "Don't tell Mom or Daniel." I wouldn't. Though he's been off all morning, kept forgetting his lines, pacing. "I think he knows you're nearby." "He doesn't." "You sure?" she asked gently. "Sometimes people feel what they need before they see it." I didn't reply. I watched as the university president took the mic and began his welcome. His voice echoed crisply through the quad. Rows of graduates in green and gold robes leaned forward in their seats. Susan sat toward the front, a perfect pillar of approval, her lipstick a sharp coral, her heels not even sinking into the grass. I pulled my sunglasses lower on my nose and adjusted my bag strap. 15 minutes into the ceremony, just as they began the roll call for special recognition awards, the audio cracked. A sharp pop blared through the speakers, then static, then silence. The crowd stirred. The president tapped the microphone. Nothing. A few murmurs. One dad laughed awkwardly and nudged his teenage daughter. On stage, the speaker's face twitched in confusion. Technicians scrambled toward the side. One of them bent over a laptop, muttering into a headset. Then the live stream cut. I could see it on the tech manager's screen, a frozen image of the podium, then a red error screen. The YouTube feed collapsed, and dozens of virtual attendees, parents and family across the country, were now staring at buffering circles. A younger guy with a clipboard cursed under his breath. I stepped forward before I had time to second guess. "Need help?" The man turned, startled. "Sorry, this area is off limits to guests." I flashed the old press badge. "I'm not just a guest. Former media chair, student paper. I've worked this system before." He narrowed his eyes. "When was that?" 3 years ago. This setup hasn't changed. You're running the wireless mic input through a direct-to-web encoder without backup. You're overheating the signal path." He blinked. A second tech nearby spoke up. "Wait, are you Avery Collins?" I froze. He grinned. "You're the one who fixed the relay loop during Homecoming 2019. That was you?" "Yeah," I said, surprised. "That was me." He nodded quickly. "She knows what she's doing. Let her in." Clipboard guy hesitated, then stepped aside. I climbed into the cramped AV trailer, instantly greeted by the familiar whir of overworked fans and a tangled jungle of cables. I scanned the panel, located the encoder's reset, and toggled to backup audio routing. The sound snapped back on. I patched in a manual mic override, then restarted the live stream overlay. 90 seconds later, a voice filled the quad again. The president cleared his throat and continued as if nothing had happened. A murmur of applause broke out, not for the speaker, but for the return of the sound. Families laughed. A baby clapped randomly. Things returned to normal. I stepped back, brushed my hair behind my ear. One of the younger techs glanced at me and said with genuine awe, "You just saved the day." I gave a small shrug, almost smiled. "That's kind of my thing." I exited quietly, weaving back to the edge of the crowd. No one in the audience knew what had happened, but that was fine. My part was over. I wasn't there for applause. Then I heard it. The next name being called. Daniel Collins. I turned slightly, saw him step forward, his robe perfectly pressed. He moved with confidence, at least on the outside. The crowd clapped. Susan stood to applaud. Cameras clicked, and in that moment I almost let myself feel proud, until my eyes locked with hers. Susan. She stood tall, her hands still mid-clap, but her gaze had drifted. Toward me. Through the mass of chairs and parents, past the tents and cords, she saw me, standing at the edge of the tech station, not trying to hide, but not trying to be seen either. Our eyes met for a second. Her expression didn't change. It didn't harden. It didn't soften. Just unreadable. I didn't flinch. I didn't wave. I simply stood still, letting her look. She turned back to face the stage, and I stayed exactly where I was. I was never supposed to be in the slideshow, but somehow my words made it in. I stood near the back of the open-air garden courtyard, tucked behind a string of overhead lights that flickered gently in the June dusk. The reception was in full swing. Wine glasses clinked, a small jazz quartet played standards under a white canopy, and waitstaff moved like dancers between tables with trays of mini quiches and melon skewers. The air smelled like fresh basil, champagne, and sun-warmed roses, the kind of scent that would normally relax you if you hadn't been specifically told to stay away. But I wasn't inside the family tent or at one of the tables with name cards. I hovered by the catering truck, half camouflaged by a hedge, watching from a safe distance. A projector flickered to life on a white screen near the stage, signaling the start of the slideshow. Daniel's name, in gold cursive, danced across the screen. Class of 2023, A Journey in Pictures. The photos began. Daniel as a baby, chubby cheeks and frosting on his nose. Daniel in a soccer jersey. Daniel holding a science fair trophy. Every milestone perfectly curated. I took a sip from my paper cup of lukewarm, sparkling cider. A child nearby dropped a cracker. No one noticed. No one noticed me either, until one of the slides changed. A black background. White serif text fading in. Sometimes the most terrifying step is the one that frees you. The line hit me like a pin through cloth. Quick, unexpected, and precise. My stomach tightened. It was my sentence. I had written it late one night, bleary-eyed and over-caffeinated, while editing Daniel's final scholarship essay. He'd paced the room behind me while I typed, offering half-baked metaphors and vague feelings. I had turned them into shape. The line had stayed with me, not because it was brilliant, but because it had been honest. And now it was here, displayed on a screen, sandwiched between childhood memories and graduation portraits. Grandma, standing a few feet ahead of me, turned slightly and whispered, "That sounds like you." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. From across the lawn, I caught a glimpse of Susan standing near the main table. Perfect posture, coral lips, eyes fixed on the screen, smile unwavering, as if she had rehearsed that expression just in case anyone was watching her watching him. Professor Jensen, one of Daniel's faculty advisors, stood nearby chatting with a group of guests. He gestured toward the screen and chuckled. That essay, it was one of the most emotionally raw pieces I've read in a long time. The phrasing, that's what got me. Poetic, almost. Had to double-check if Daniel was double majoring in English. Susan beamed. We're very proud. He's always had a talent for expression. I fought the urge to laugh. Not bitterly, just out of that strange cosmic irony where someone compliments you without even knowing it's you. Because Daniel hadn't always had that kind of voice. He'd had facts, structure, ambition, but vulnerability? That came from hours of rewriting with me nudging him. Say it simpler. Say it real. But what if I sound weak? He had asked once. Then you'll sound human. The slideshow ended with a group photo of Daniel and his fellow scholarship recipients, all smiling beneath a banner that read Future Leaders. Applause followed, light, polite, appropriate. The kind of clapping that says, well done and let's move on. Daniel stepped up to the mic. He looked composed. Sharp suit, pressed collar, shoes that didn't scuff. But his hand twitched slightly as he adjusted the mic. Only someone who knew him well would notice. I want to thank you all for being here tonight, he began, voice steady but softer than usual. This day isn't just about me. It's about everyone who helped me get here. Susan nodded proudly from her seat. Daniel continued, There's a lot I could say about determination, about excellence, about family pride. But I want to use this moment to say something else. A slight murmur moved through the crowd. I want to thank someone who didn't get a seat at the table tonight. Someone who isn't in most of these photos, but who was always, always part of my story. My chest tightened. She helped me believe that writing could be honest, that effort didn't need a spotlight to be valuable, and she reminded me that truth is often quiet, but that doesn't make it small. He glanced toward the back of the crowd, to Avery Collins, my sister. Thank you. I couldn't have done this without you. The silence was immediate, and then applause, louder than before. A few guests looked around, confused, scanning for me. A whisper here, a surprised glance there. I stood very still. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I turned to leave. My feet moved quickly along the path behind the tent, the music fading behind me. I reached the gravel edge of the courtyard just as the next speaker took the mic. Then I heard it again. Avery Collins. Someone must have said it into the mic, or maybe Daniel repeated it. My name, out loud, in front of everyone, after years of not being spoken in that house, not being printed in cards or listed in programs. I stopped walking, my back to the crowd. The breeze tugged at my cardigan. I didn't turn around. Behind me, someone's camera flashed, catching my silhouette against the twilight. Maybe later, someone would frame it. Maybe they wouldn't. Didn't matter. He didn't bring flowers. He brought silence, soaked in rain. I saw him through the peephole. His hood down, dark hair slicked to his forehead, water dripping off his chin. He stood there on the mat outside my apartment, hands shoved into the pockets of a damp gray jacket. His shoulders rose and fell slowly, not from breathlessness, but hesitation. The rain hadn't let up for hours. It tapped against my windows like a clock I couldn't ignore. Inside, the apartment was warm, dimly lit, and quiet. My chamomile tea sat untouched on the end table, its steam fading into nothing. I hadn't expected him. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. Still, there he was. I stepped back from the door, pressed my palms flat against the counter behind me. My heart was racing, not the kind of fear that comes from danger, but the kind that comes from reopening something you thought had long since scarred over. Another knock. Software. Uncertain. Then stillness. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Let him stand there until the rain made him go away. But I remembered a time when the roles were reversed. Daniel was 10, maybe 11. He had stayed up late finishing a model of the solar system for science class. It was his first time using glue guns and wires, and he was proud of it, until our cat, Leo, knocked the whole thing off the table while he slept. The planets were everywhere. Mars under the radiator. Jupiter split in two. He had cried. Not loud or dramatic, just quietly in the hallway, knees pulled to his chest, his face pressed against the wall. I had found him like that. I didn't say anything. I just gathered the pieces, sat down beside him, and helped glue them back together. We stayed up until nearly dawn, finishing a less than perfect version that still earned him a gold star. "You didn't have to help," he had mumbled. I had shrugged. "Yeah, but I wanted to." I opened the door. Daniel looked up, blinking through rainwater and surprise. "Hey." I didn't say a word, just stepped aside. He entered cautiously, like he wasn't sure he had the right to be there. I handed him a towel from the hook near the door. No hug, no welcome, just the offering of warmth. He took it with a nod, patting his face and rubbing the back of his neck. "Sorry, I know it's late." I folded my arms across my chest. "You walked here." "Not far. I needed air." He gestured vaguely to the rain. Apparently, I got more than that. I almost smiled. Almost. He scanned the room like it was a museum he wasn't allowed to touch. His eyes landed on the bookshelf, the photo of us as kids still tucked behind a row of novels. "I remember that day," he said quietly. "You told me I looked like a dragon who had eaten too many cookies." "You did," I replied. He laughed once, then sat slowly on the edge of my couch, still clutching the towel. "I wanted to say thank you for everything." I leaned against the kitchen counter. "You already did, at the reception." "I know, but I needed to say it to you, face to face." I waited. He exhaled. "You didn't owe me anything, but you still showed up." A pause hung between us. I looked at him carefully, his face older now, more thoughtful. He had always been a good kid, polite, smart, but he'd grown up learning how to perform comfort, not how to feel it. "You were a child," I said. "I never blamed you." "But I knew," he said softly. "I knew you helped. I knew Mom was being cruel. I knew it when you left, and I stayed quiet because it was easier." That was the thing about truth. It never arrived like a scream. It settled in like fog, soft, slow, impossible to ignore once it surrounded you. "You wanted her love," I said, "even if it meant losing me." He nodded. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't even flinch. I just turned and poured him a cup of the tea that had gone cold, then handed it to him without meeting his eyes. He took it with both hands. "Do you hate me?" I shook my head. "I don't have the energy for hate, not anymore." He looked down at the mug. "I kept thinking I'd find a way to fix it, to make it up to you. But there's no fix, is there?" "No," I said quietly. There's just honesty and time." He nodded slowly. The rain outside softened, pattering instead of pounding. After a moment, I sat down in the chair across from him. We didn't talk for a while. Eventually, he stood to leave. I didn't offer to walk him out. At the door, he turned. "I'm sorry I chose silence." I met his gaze. "You chose silence, I didn't. That's why I left." He didn't reply, but he didn't leave either. He just sat back down like maybe the conversation wasn't over, like maybe this time silence could mean something else. That night, after he finally did leave, I opened my journal for the first time in nearly 2 years. I wrote exactly one line. "Some bridges don't burn. They wait." She called it discipline. I called it control. She called it love. I called it fear. The silence in her living room wasn't accidental. It was intentional. Crafted like everything else in the space. The matching linen drapes, the untouched white couch, the glass coffee table with the art magazines that no one read. Even the air smelled curated, like citrus and cold marble. I stood just inside the doorway, my palms slick despite the late spring chill. The rain from earlier in the week had passed, leaving the day sunlit and still. The light poured in through the spotless windows, and yet the room felt dim. "Come in," Grandma Louise said softly, placing her hand gently on my elbow as if to anchor me. She wore a navy sweater and a silver brooch in the shape of a dove. Somehow, she always knew what to wear when things were hard. She gave me the smallest nod, that kind of wordless encouragement she'd mastered over the years. Then she shuffled off toward the kitchen, giving us space, but not disappearing. Susan Collins sat upright on the edge of a beige armchair, legs crossed, hands clasped too tightly in her lap. Her hair was perfect, as always. Her pearl earrings matched the single pearl on her wedding band, the one she still wore even though Dad had been gone for over a decade. She didn't rise to greet me. She didn't offer coffee or ask about the drive. She just stared at me like I was both an unwanted guest and a test she wasn't prepared to take. "I assume you're here to justify what you did," she said. "No," I replied, calmly taking the seat across from her. "I'm here because Grandma asked me to come." She gave a tight smile. Of course she did. The air pulsed with a kind of tension that felt older than either of us, like something passed down, coded into the DNA of women who didn't know how to bend without breaking. "I didn't come to argue," I said. "You humiliated me," she snapped, not loudly but sharply enough to slice through the calm. "In front of everyone. You made a scene." I tilted my head. "Daniel made the speech. You should have stopped him." "He's 22, Mom. He can decide who he wants to thank." Her jaw twitched. "You knew what would happen if you showed up." "I wasn't hiding," I said. "But I wasn't on the guest list either, remember?" Her eyes narrowed. "You broke my plan." That stopped me. She said it like she believed it, like her blueprint for this family had been a sacred thing, and I had carelessly spilled ink all over it. "I wasn't born to be part of a plan," I said. "I'm not a footnote in someone else's speech." Susan sat back, her knuckles pale from how tightly she clutched her hands. Grandma reappeared briefly, placed a small glass of water on the table in front of me, and gave me the smallest nod again. Then she walked out, quietly, like she was making sure we couldn't escape the conversation by pretending it never started. There was a long pause. "You always had to challenge everything," my mother said finally. "Rules, expectations, me." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "You mean I had opinions?" "You were defiant." "I was different," I corrected, "and you didn't know what to do with that." She exhaled, leaning back in her chair. "I didn't know how to raise a daughter who didn't need me." That was it. The thing beneath all the other things. I let the sentence hang between us. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't accused. She had admitted something, not an apology, but the softest truth she had ever handed me. "I never needed your approval," I said, my voice low. "Just your belief." She looked away then toward the window, where two birds hopped along the porch railing, unaware they had become background actors in the most overdue conversation of my life. I remembered something Grandma once told me years ago after I left home. Your mother's walls were built by someone else. She just passed them down. I'd spent years resenting those walls, fighting them, running from them. But now, as I watched her sit there, pristine, composed, unraveling, I realized she hadn't built them maliciously. She'd simply never learned how to live without them. You always wanted me to be like Daniel, I said. Safe, predictable, praiseworthy. That's not true, she replied too quickly. I raised an eyebrow. She hesitated. Okay, maybe I thought it would be easier if you were like him. Easier for who? Her lips parted, but no words came out. We sat in silence for a while. Finally, she reached toward the coffee table and picked up one of the untouched magazines. She didn't open it, just held it like it might protect her from saying too much. I don't expect forgiveness, she said after a long pause. But would you come to dinner next week? Just dinner, no slideshow, no speeches. I didn't answer right away. I stood up slowly, smoothed my sweater, and looked around the room. Every photo was perfectly centered, dustless, orderly, except for one blank frame near the hallway, the spot where my graduation photo used to be. I'll think about it, I said. She didn't rise. She didn't press. I left with no hug, no smile. But as I stepped outside and felt the warm sun on my face, I realized something had shifted. Maybe not in her, but in me. And sometimes that's the only shift that matters. Healing doesn't come in fireworks. It comes in mismatched chairs, overcooked pasta, flickering candles, and the quiet moment when your voice echoes back to you and you no longer flinch. Grandma's dining table wasn't made for elegance. One leg had a slight wobble that required a folded coaster. The chairs didn't match. 3 wood, 1 metal, one with an old floral cushion tied on with ribbon. The candles were half burnt. The table runner was slightly off-center. But the room radiated something I hadn't felt in years. Home. Not the house I grew up in, but a moment that didn't ask me to earn my seat. I placed my dish in the center. Roasted root vegetables glazed in honey, thyme, and garlic. The edges crisped just enough, the colors warm and autumnal, even though it was early summer. It was my signature, not from any cookbook. Just something I'd made 100 times when I was tired or lonely or in need of grounding. Daniel arrived next, carrying a bottle of wine he clearly didn't choose himself, still wearing the wrong shoes for Oregon gravel. Grandma took it with a smile and patted his cheek like he was 5 again. Susan came last. She didn't say much, just nodded when Grandma opened the door. She brought a salad, store-bought, the plastic container still slightly damp, but she placed it gently on the table and offered a quiet, "Hope this helps." It wasn't a peace offering, it was something smaller, less showy, something real. We didn't pray before we ate, but we paused. Grandma lifted her glass. To family still learning how to sit at the same table. We clinked. The wine was too dry. The pasta was slightly overcooked. The salad still had bits of the price sticker stuck on the tongs. And yet, I'd never tasted a more honest meal. Conversation started slow. Daniel told us about his new job, teaching at a community center downtown, offering art classes to kids who didn't know how to hold a brush, let alone express themselves. Corporate law sounded impressive, he admitted, spearing a carrot, but I didn't want to keep living someone else's biography. Grandma beamed. Susan said nothing, but her fork moved slowly, thoughtfully. Then came the surprise. After dessert, some slightly burned cookies Grandma insisted were crisp, not ruined, she excused herself and returned with a tattered blue box. "This," she said, placing it in front of me, "was never supposed to be lost." I opened the lid. Inside, ribbons from science fairs, a 4th grade essay with a gold star, a middle school photography contest certificate, my name in crooked handwriting on the back of drawings, even a note I'd written to Grandma at age 9 that said, I hope I make you proud one day." My breath caught. "These were mine?" I whispered. "Yours," she said gently. "I kept them when no one else did." I looked up. Susan was watching, not with anger or shame, but something more complicated, a quiet ache, a recognition. She didn't speak, but after a moment she began gathering the dishes. Without being asked, Daniel helped, clearing glasses and stacking plates like it was second nature. Grandma hummed softly as she wiped the counter. I remained seated, and then, when the clatter softened and the music from the old speaker faded into static, I spoke. "You don't have to love me the way I wanted," I said quietly. "I just needed to be seen." No one responded, but no one walked away. That was enough. Later in my apartment, I lit a small candle beside my desk, the same one I used to burn back in college, sandalwood and cinnamon. I opened my laptop, adjusted the mic, and hit record, the power of being uninvited and showing up anyway. My voice was steadier than usual, not louder, just clearer, like the echo finally had something solid to bounce off. "I spent years thinking love had to sound like applause," I said, "that if no one clapped, I hadn't done enough. But lately, I've learned that presence is its own kind of recognition." I paused, let the silence breathe. There's something sacred in showing up, in sitting at the table, even if your name's not on the place card, even if you brought your own chair. I smiled, even though no one could see it. Sometimes, we write ourselves back into the story. I clicked stop. The screen dimmed, the candle flickered. In the reflection of the monitor, I saw my face. Calm, clear, whole. That night, as I listened to my own voice filling the quiet of my apartment, I realized I no longer needed it to echo back for validation. I just needed it to sound like mine, not rehearsed, not rewritten for someone else. Some families don't come back together with grand apologies or perfect timing. Sometimes it's a shared meal, a look across the table, a quiet gesture that says, "I see you now." We all carry stories that were never told fully, but the beautiful thing is we get to pick up the pen at any age. If this story reminded you of a time you had to show up for yourself, even without an invitation, I'd love to hear it. Sometimes the most healing thing we can do is share.